Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Touchdown Tuesdays, the official football podcast of Brew Sports. I am Ian DeMars alongside co-host Ryan Solomon. And Ryan Solomon, we didn't necessarily have a busy week in the NFL in regards to big news, but there was a main deadline that was met that had to be set for Russell Wilson this past week, and it seemed like that he was able to get what he wanted with that deadline.
Yeah, and that deadline was the tax day deadline to get an extension done. And Russell Wilson did, in fact, get what he wanted, which is the richest contract in the NFL right now. And he gets 4 years, $140 million with $65 million signing bonus, which makes him the top valued quarterback in the NFL right now. And he celebrated with a very strange, kind of creepy video of him. And I don't know if that's his wife. I think it's his wife, right?
Yeah, that's his wife, Sierra.
Yeah, laying in bed together, and he's talking about Seattle and how he's going to be there now for 4 years. But it was weird. In my opinion, nobody is really worth this much money, especially when they just play a sport. Like, if there's somebody out there who's a superhero fighting crime, then maybe I could see them getting $140 million for 4 years. But for an NFL quarterback who's kind of been average at best, like Russell Wilson is a good quarterback, but he's not an Aaron Rodgers. He's not a Tom Brady. He's not a Peyton Manning when Peyton Manning was in his prime. So to me, these contracts are just getting more and more outrageous for players that probably aren't going to deliver on Super Bowls. I know Russell Wilson has one, but that team had a completely different makeup than it had now. So to me, I don't think this is worth it for the Seahawks kind of mortgaging their franchise just to pay for their quarterback.
Yeah, before I give my take on it, I know I mentioned this when we had talked before, but do you think that if Seattle would have not signed or agreed to an extension with Russell Wilson, that they would have traded him?
I think that it would have gotten messy. So I don't know if they would have traded him. I think they would have probably still tried to work something out. If you really think about it, that tax day deadline was kind of arbitrary in the fact that there was nothing in the NFL that made a deal need to get done by that day. So they could have continued talks. And, if they said we're not going to get a deal done by that time, you can either play or you can sit out and forfeit your money. I mean, I think he probably would have played.
Yeah, and you look at it, this isn't the first time that Russell Wilson has given the Seahawks a deadline. When his rookie contract was set to expire, he basically gave them until training camp to get a new deal done. He was able to get a new extension done. And I think the reason why he made this one earlier is because he knew he was going to get as much money as possible. And I think by waiting it out, it's going to put Seattle in a tough position because another quarterback might get an extension that might raise the bar a little bit more and more. And it's going to get to that point where Seattle might not be able to afford to keep Russell Wilson and still be a good team in the NFC. So looking at that way, Russell Wilson, I think, made a smart decision by having an early deadline, having it in April, having it before the draft. So this way they can look at how much money they have still. You look at the draft, they currently only have, I believe, 4 picks in the draft. So they have to make sure that they're probably going to need to sign a couple more guys this year to at least fill out the roster. And getting this done with Russell Wilson now is huge. It's going to set them up for the next couple of years, looking into free agency, looking into how to go after these draft picks, even though there are only 4 this year. The thing is with the money, we see a lot of quarterbacks get some money that we might not say they deserve. Russell Wilson, I think, is in the conversation to get this money because Seattle's been a dominant team with him there. They've won a Super Bowl with him there. He's shown the ability to be one of the best quarterbacks in the league. He's been up there in the MVP talks over these last few years. And when you look at last couple of years, if Russell Wilson's not on that team, they're not a playoff team the way that the offense has looked. He puts that offense together, and because of that, he got this huge contract. He's now the quarterback benchmark for contracts. He's getting a lot of money, got a huge signing bonus, and it's going to – I mean, he'll have it for now, but next year he's not going to be that top quarterback anymore for money.
Yeah, which is crazy because whoever's signed next, even if they're mediocre, like somebody who's a random free agent that's expected to be good is going to get a ridiculous contract. And so we're just going to continue to see this spiraling up and up and up and up. And I don't really see an end in sight. I think it would take some sort of NFL collusion or collective bargaining to start bringing down salaries because the players are starting to be in more control of where they're going. Because we've seen holdouts, we've seen Antonio Brown basically leverage himself to get a trade. We've seen Le'Veon Bell leverage his position to get moved off the Steelers. So, and now with Russell Wilson basically forcing a deal to develop here, we're seeing the players starting to take more of a stand on where they're going, how they're going to be playing, how they're going to be dealt with. And this is sort of a new age of negotiations in the NFL that we haven't really seen anywhere except for the NBA up until this point.
Yeah, it's a weird situation because we're seeing it more nowadays where the players have the power over the teams. You look at it back maybe 15, 20, over 15, 20 years ago, you could say that teams had power over signing players. But nowadays, it's the players that have that advantage of taking the opportunities from teams. It's not just the NFL. Look at other sports. Baseball, I think, is the main example. You have a lot of guys in free agency that don't sign right away. They wait till spring trainings either just before it starts or even midway through spring training to sign a contract. That's how much leverage players have nowadays, and it's starting to come into the NFL. As you said, with Le'Veon Bell, it's happened with Antonio Brown. We just saw Russell Wilson give a super early deadline. The players are taking leverage of these contract situations over teams, and you think this is bad? Guarantee you over the next couple of years, we're going to see something that might be a bigger deadline and could be a big cause for concern for some other NFL team.
Yeah, I don't think there's any going back at this point. I think that we've gotten to the age where star power is key, and those NFL franchises are basically bowing to the whim of the players. And I just don't think that's going to change anytime soon unless there was some sort of big situation involving like a lockout or basically a termination of a lot of the larger contracts in the NFL. But it's bringing in so much money that they're able to pay all of those contracts. And so teams are realizing that it's more lucrative to just do the signings, work with what the players want, as opposed to trying to strong arm the situation.
And one last thing about the new contract for Russell Wilson. With the 4-year deal, do you think that he and Seattle win a Super Bowl or at least get to a Super Bowl in any of those 4 years?
I don't think so. I think the NFC is going to be so loaded, and the Seahawks are going to be bogged down by that huge amount that they're paying Russell Wilson that they're not going to be able to pay some of their other key players or bring in key free agents with high prices. So I think that this is going to really hamstring that franchise for the next 4 years. They're going to have Russell Wilson, but I don't think they're going to be able to bring in much else.
Yeah, and the tough thing about it this year is, as I said before, they don't have many draft picks this year. So unless they're willing to make some trades in order to get some more draft picks, it's going to be tough to get some players at least for this year. They're going to have to start looking into next year's draft, I think, to get some of the quality players that they're going to look to develop over these next few years with Russell Wilson at the helm in Seattle.
Yeah, but let's go on to another key player, and that's Todd Gurley, who says that his knee is good to go and that he should be back to full action. Are you buying this, or are you still concerned about Gurley and his health?
I'm not buying it right now. And the reason why I'm saying I'm not buying it right now is he said his knee is pretty good. Now, pretty good leaves some airway saying he's not fully 100%. And we saw what happened to him towards the end of last season, where in the postseason against the Cowboys had a very phenomenal game, but also was a little overshadowed by C.J. Anderson's dominant performance. And then you look at the NFC Championship game, even the Super Bowl, it was like Todd Gurley wasn't even there. Something was up, and Los Angeles didn't really want to mention anything in regards to what this was. So we really never knew what the injury was with Todd Gurley. We do know that he's had some knee issues in the past. He did tear his ACL in college. He's had some lingering knee issues as well since being in the NFL. So this could be something that could continue to be ongoing throughout not just this upcoming season, but possibly the rest of his career. So it's good to hear him say that his knee feels pretty good. But at this point, you obviously want to make sure he's 100%. So during these off-season activities, wouldn't surprise me to see him maybe take it easy, not do much or if anything during the voluntary part, and then during mandatory, just focus on getting treatments and doing what you can to stay healthy, because he is the guy that gets that team going in Los Angeles. And he was a main reason why they've been successful these last couple of years. And he's going to be the reason why they continue to have success while he is with the Los Angeles Rams, especially after signing that contract extension last year.
Yeah, it was a fascinating situation when one of the most dominant offensive weapons in the game is used sparingly in the biggest game of the year. And it almost seemed like it wasn't the Super Bowl and it was a Week 17 game, and they were sort of trying to keep Gurley fresh until the next week playoff started, except it was actually the Super Bowl. It was very odd, and you would think that if Gurley was actually even close to being healthy back then, when we were kind of led to believe that he was good enough to play health-wise, that he would have been in more heavily than C.J. Anderson was, who got the bulk of the carries in a lot of those playoff games. So I don't know what the situation is with Todd Gurley or how bad any of his injuries really were, or if he's fully recovered. But I think that we're not going to be able to trust it until we actually see him out there running over defenders and hurdling defenders and getting back to the Todd Gurley that we saw be so dominant the past 2 seasons.
And look, do you think that the Rams possibly had overused Todd Gurley and that was a result of his knee injury?
I mean, it's possible, but it's not like he got more carries than some of these other running backs that haven't gotten injured, like a Le'Veon Bell. The season before he sat out. So Todd Gurley was definitely a heavy usage guy, but it wasn't like he was getting injured on and off the whole time. He was fairly reliable through most of those seasons when he had those high numbers of carries.
Yeah, and you look at what happened down the stretch. The numbers did go down a little bit, but that playoff game against the Cowboys, he seemed like he was all good to go. He and C.J. Anderson looked like a dominant 1-2 force that could have been a real threat for the remainder of the playoffs. And then that next week, we saw that it was mainly the C.J. Anderson show on the ground, with Todd Gurley barely being on the field. I think he only had 4 run plays exact to be in that game, and then saw a little bit more opportunities in the Super Bowl. But that offense was just so staggered, they couldn't do anything, which really didn't give him much of an opportunity. So it's kind of a weird situation right now if you're the Rams and Todd Gurley. Because obviously if you're the Rams, you want him to be healthy, and I think Gurley realizes that too, but Gurley also doesn't want to be off the field. He's had to miss time due to knee injuries before, and he doesn't want to take any more time off, but he has to realize that he right now is their franchise player and he needs to stay healthy. And even if that means missing some time, that's something he's got to do in order to get back to 100%.
Yeah, we're seeing people get more, or teams get more careful with players now because they recognize that they don't want to run a guy into the ground and have him unavailable for the next 2 years or even longer than that. So they're doing the best that they can to make sure that people are full strength before actually sending them out there again, to avoid those constant nagging, recurring injuries, because they'd rather have them as fresh as possible and just get by without them for the time being, I think.
Yeah, definitely something to keep an eye out for as these off-season team activities roll on in the NFL. And then as we get into training camp, it'd be interesting to see if he is a full goal or if something's going to continue to hold him back. But we still got a few months till that. We did see another key signing happen this week in the NFL. Demaryius Thomas, the former Broncos and Houston Texans wide receiver, signed a deal to play with Tom Brady and the New England Patriots. Demaryius Thomas is coming off a torn Achilles with the Houston Texans after getting traded there mid-season. It's unsure when he will be expected to play. Obviously, hopes are that he's ready for the start of the season, but could miss a little bit of time. Is this a high risk, high reward kind of scenario for the Patriots, or do you think that this was something that they needed to do?
I don't think it's a high risk, high reward situation. I think it's a low risk, low reward situation, or potentially a high reward, I guess. But I don't think there's a lot of risk in adding a veteran wide receiver. I mean, sure, he had that injury, but we see players come back from that pretty consistently, and they always find a way, no matter who's out there, to get them the ball and use a scheme to make the most of their players' individual talent. So Demaryius Thomas at this point is pretty much a possession receiver. He's not going to stretch the field immensely. And we saw that with the Texans last year. I expected him to actually be better than he was with Houston, but he just never really panned out there. I think his best days are definitely behind him, but he does fill the role of body in the wide receiving core for the New England Patriots. With them losing Chris Hogan this year, they're going to need some people to step in and catch passes for them. And who better to do it than a veteran who's already been to a couple Super Bowls?
Yeah, the thing is, right now with the Patriots, they kind of need some receiver depth. They just said they no longer have Chris Hogan. Rob Gronkowski retired. Josh Gordon suspended. We also saw some young receivers struggle for that team last year. Cordero Patterson's no longer with the team. So they kind of needed to get someone in to fill that spot. And I think Thomas could work out for them. Thomas is a very productive NFL wide receiver, has been a Pro Bowler, has won the Super Bowl with the Denver Broncos. But a torn Achilles is a very tough injury to come back from. He could still perform well, but he's not going to perform as well as he did when he was a Pro Bowler. Now, you look at the last couple of years, he's put up good numbers, but hasn't been putting up those Pro Bowl caliber numbers. But a torn Achilles is a very tough injury to come back from. You lose a little bit in your step, you lose some of your lateral agility. It's going to be tough for him to come back. But I think in that Patriots system, he's going to find a way to work through that. And I think this could be a good deal for the Patriots in the end.
Yeah, it could be, and there's not a whole lot of risk in my opinion because I don't think there's a lot of expectations. So they still have Julian Edelman there who's going to catch passes. They're going to find some other people that are going to be key contributors in that offense with or without Demaryius Thomas being a primary factor because that's what always happens. If you look at the Patriots' history, they did not usually have a player that was catching a huge number of balls or was an all-star in the receiving core. They sort of just produced players that could work in the system, catch passes. If you remember, Wes Welker was that kind of guy. Deion Branch was that kind of guy. Troy Brown was that kind of guy. None of these guys were really stars except for Randy Moss, and they didn't even win a Super Bowl with Randy Moss. So I think that they'll be fine with or without Demaryius Thomas producing big numbers, but I think it's good that they have him there.
Yeah, and he's another veteran on a team that typically has some key veterans that find success. And looking at that Patriots team, you still have Tom Brady. So it looks like that the road to the Super Bowl in the AFC is going to go through New England no matter what. So getting another big piece like Demaryius Thomas is something that is going to help them and should be key for them going forward. But going on into next season, the NFL is set to release the regular season schedule for the new season coming out tomorrow night. What's one thing that you're looking out for when they do release the schedules?
What I always look for when the schedules come out, first of all, is Monday night games and then holiday games. So the Thanksgiving games, if there's going to be a game on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, there's going to be a game on Halloween. Those are what I look forward to the most, especially the Thanksgiving ones, because I like to try and see if any of those teams could potentially wear throwback uniforms, because that's part of my favorite part of the holiday tradition is when they used to do the throwback uniforms. So those are usually the things I look for first.
Yeah, looking at the last few years, something that I've kind of kept an eye for is how the Thursday night games are played on. The reason why I say that is because a few years ago, the NFL did something. They tried doing these color rush uniforms on Thursday, which was a very unique idea, but there was some mixed results in it. You had some teams playing that you really wouldn't expect to be playing on a prime time like Thursday even or Thursday night game. There was the whole scenario where the Bills, I believe it was the Bills and the Jets wore they wore the red and the green, and there were some issues where colorblind people couldn't tell who was who, and that became an issue. And there's been some issues of the games not being as competitive. We've seen players complain about the games due to players having short weeks. But I think that last year we started, or there's been trends where a couple of years we've seen very close games, and a couple of years we've seen a lot of blowouts. And last year I think was more on the blowout trend on Thursday night games. So I think this year I'm curious to see who they have matched up, because I think this year we're going to see a lot more Thursday night or closer games on Thursday night, just because that's kind of how the trend's been over the last few years.
It's definitely possible that there's blowouts again, because it seems like teams usually aren't ready for that game, and you get some kind of weird results sometimes with the score lines and with key players not always contributing and new guys that you wouldn't expect to be good having good performances. So it kind of depends on which team can rebound fastest from their last game rather than which team is actually better, it seems.
And looking at when the schedule comes out tomorrow, if you had to pick the one team that's going to have the most primetime games, meaning Thursday night, Sunday night, or Monday night games, which team do you think is going to have the most primetime action?
I would say the Kansas City Chiefs.
And why do you say the Chiefs?
Because Pat Mahomes is such an explosive player now, and so is Tyreek Hill, that I think they're going to want to showcase that Kansas City Chiefs offense as much as they possibly can. They're expected to be good. They have some solid rivalry opportunities with the Chargers and the Raiders looked possible last year in Oakland. And then they're going to play the Patriots too. That they're going to play the Texans. So there's going to be some key matchups for them to showcase, and I think the Chiefs are going to be a team that everybody's going to want to see.
Yeah, the Chiefs definitely, I think, would be a team that could have that opportunity. I also think that based off of last year, you could even make a case for the Rams. Remember that Monday night game between those two teams, one of the highest scoring games in the history of the NFL regular season. So I think those two teams have the most likely opportunity to have the most primetime games. But we will just have to wait one more day to see who will have that opportunity to showcase their primetime opportunity the most.
Here's a out of left field one for you. How about Cleveland?
Cleveland, they're going to have an opportunity to be on more than once this year, and it's not going to be because they have a great opportunity to end the losing streak. They're going to get some primetime action because of all the star talent on that team.
Yeah, I think they're going to get at least 3 primetime games this year with the anticipation that was around them last year, and now with the additions they made. I think that the NFL is going to get out in front of that one and put them on a showcase position on more than one occasion for sure.
Most definitely. Like I said, make sure to keep an eye out for that tomorrow night when the new schedules do come for the regular season. With that said, let's move on to our past week's question of the week, which focused on the NFL draft. So the Arizona Cardinals had the first pick of the draft. The question basically was asking, what side of the ball are they going to choose with that first pick come next week? Is it going to be offense or defense? And Ryan, I know last week we kind of went off on who was going to take that first pick. You had said, or who was going to be that first pick. You were saying Kyler Murray. I was saying Nick Bosa. Before we get into our mock drafts, are you still thinking offense, or do you think that it's going to be defense?
I'm still thinking offense for the Cardinals.
Okay, and Facebook was agreeing with you on that. It was a pretty close vote, but over 55% of voters said that offense was going to be where they chose. However, I'm still sticking with defense, and Twitter agreed with me. Over 60% of voters said that they were going to go defense. And it's just going to be interesting to see what's going to happen, because this next week we're going to hear a lot about what Cliff Kingsbury wants to do, whether he wants to try and get this offense going with Josh Rosen, whether he's willing to take an opportunity on a new quarterback, whether it's just going to be a very hectic week. And then we also have the scenarios of who might trade up to get that first pick, because knowing recent history, someone could definitely trade up and get that first pick from the Cardinals.
Yeah, they could definitely trade up. I think the Cardinals might actually use that pick because I think we went over this last week. Cliff Kingsbury wants a guy that's his quarterback, and I don't know if that entire franchise is sold on Josh Rosen. Just having the opportunity to have him in the system for a year and have him around, it doesn't seem like they're overly enamored with his work ethic or anything about him, really. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if they just traded him. And they could trade out of that pick, but I think they're going to use it to take Kyler Murray still.
And with that said, Ryan, that's bringing us to one of our highly anticipated moments of the year, and that is the Touchdown Tuesdays NFL mock draft. Now, Ryan, we have not looked at either one of each other's mock drafts, so it's going to be very interesting to see how we assume each direction is going to go, with that being teams, with that being trades, with that being how many quarterbacks are going to be taken. Because there's been lots of trends where we've seen top picks in the top 5 get traded. We've seen 4 or 5 quarterbacks go in the first round. So it's going to be interesting to see if this year some trends are going to continue or some trends are going to stay the same. So we're basically going to go through all the picks in the first round, give a little brief detail on why we decided on who we picked for each team. Ryan, how about you go first? So Arizona currently is on the clock. Who do you have them taking with the first pick?
Sure. So I have them with Kyler Murray, quarterback from Oklahoma, who I'm sticking strong to what I've been saying about them taking Kyler Murray. I think that his dynamic playmaking ability, combined with the fact that he was actually taller than people anticipated, have the Cardinals taking him number 1 overall.
See, definitely a good option. I do think that if they are looking to try and go into a new direction, if they don't think that Rosen's going to be that guy, then Kyler Murray is for sure that guy. However, I'm thinking at this point, if I'm the Cardinals, you have to go with a guy who's going to turn around your offense right away. With Kyler Murray, I'm not sure if he can do that. And something that you need to do is look at that defense. The defense that has been a main focal point over the last few years took a step back last year. And I think you have to go after the best defensive player in the draft. So I say the Arizona Cardinals select Nick Bosa, defensive end from Ohio State. This guy's been a monster in the Big Ten. Had an injury-shortened season this year, then left school so he could focus on the draft. He's healthy now. He looks great. I think this guy could be a game changer in the NFL.
See, I just really don't think Nick Bosa is going to go number 1 overall, because I think if the Cardinals weren't going to pick Kyler Murray, they would trade that number 1 pick to somebody to try to get a few more assets out of it. Because while Nick Bosa is a very, very good defensive player, I think that some team drafting number 1 overall is going to love Kyler Murray enough that they're going to pay big to get him for sure. So I would not be surprised at all if the Cardinals end up trading that pick for Kyler Murray, so somebody else drafts him. I just think he's going to be the first player picked. There's too much hype around him for him to slide very far in the draft, I think.
Okay, that's interesting take you got there. So who do you have number 2? That's the San Francisco 49ers.
Yep, I have your guy, Nick Bosa, at number 2 to the 49ers. I think they're going to try to bolster that defense, and I do believe Nick Bosa is the best defensive player in the draft, so I think he's going to go off the board there.
Yeah, definitely. They could definitely get someone on that defensive line to help out the team. Me, I have the 49ers. I don't have them taking a pick here. I have them trading this pick. And I have them trading with a team that is in desperate need of a quarterback, at least maybe next year. And that's the New York Football Giants. I have them swapping picks. So I have the Giants moving up from 6 to 2. I have the 49ers dropping from 2 to 6. I do think that, obviously they would get a couple more picks later on in the draft as well to kind of even out that deal. And with the second pick now with the Giants, I have them picking quarterback Kyler Murray from Oklahoma. They need to go in a different direction. He's an explosive player. He can do a lot. He proved that he's bigger than what people were expecting. I think he could be a game changer for that team, even if he's not playing all a lot this year. Learning a little bit from Eli Manning could be beneficial for him. I think he could be the future for the New York Football Giants.
All right. I'm going to go to number 3 then, where I have the Jets taking Josh Allen, the Kentucky edge rusher. The Jets actually have a pretty good situation going on offense right now, so I think they're going to take advantage of this defense-heavy draft and take Josh Allen, who a lot of people think is going to be a very good player.
And you and I are in agreement on that one. I also have them going with Josh Allen. This guy is an explosive talent, and a lot of people think that a good NFL comparison to him is Khalil Mack, and I definitely do see that in him. The Jets, they are starting to make some strides with some of their offensive picks. Obviously, Sam Darnold is going to be, I think, a very good quarterback in this league. You get Le'Veon Bell in free agency, so that offense is already looking a lot better. Now you focus on the defense, where you've made some good moves this offseason, signing C.J. Mosley, and then you get a good rusher and Josh Allen to improve that team. They're a couple years away from being good, but they're going to be making some good picks this year.
All right. At number 4, I have the Raiders taking Montez Sweat from Mississippi State. I think that the Raiders, with all of their picks this year, are going to use it to really bolster that defense. Like I said, I think that they are not necessarily sold long-term on Derek Carr, but I think they're going to give him one more year. Some pundits have had them taking a quarterback in this draft. I don't see it happening. And with the addition of Antonio Brown, I don't think they're going to go much offense here unless they were to go O-line instead. But I see them taking Montez Sweat, who can be a dynamic edge rusher in their defense.
And Sweat does fill a void that they need on defense. Is that someone that can rush and put a lot of pressure on the quarterback? And the reason why as the Raiders GM in this scenario, I'm not picking Sweat is because we've seen what did the Raiders do quite some years ago. They picked a guy that was so dominant in the combine with his numbers, its speed, and everything. And it ended up being somewhat of a bust in Darius Hayward. So I think that because of that, they don't go Montez Sweat. I think here they actually go with Sean Gary from Michigan. This guy is a powerful lineman that was basically double-teamed every snap of the way when he was with Michigan. But he can put a lot of pressure on a quarterback. He can put a pretty good lick on the quarterback as well when he gets that opportunity. He's not going to get double-teamed all the time in the NFL. He's going to show why he was a number 1 recruit while he in high school, and I think he could be a key figure for that Oakland Raiders line going forward.
All right, interesting. Let's keep it going then. Next up is the Buccaneers, and I have them taking Quinnen Williams, the defensive lineman from Alabama. They need to retool pretty much their whole offense and whole defense, the Buccaneers do. So I think this is going to be a solid block for them, literally and figuratively, in Quinnen Williams clogging up the middle of that defensive line.
And Quinnen Williams, you look at a few months ago, a lot of people thought that this guy could possibly be the number 1 pick in this draft. So him falling to 5 would be a good case scenario for Tampa Bay. However, I'm going in a little bit of a different direction here. So for Tampa Bay at 5, I have them going with the linebacker out of LSU, Devin White. I think a linebacker is a key position to have in the NFL, and that Tampa Bay defense has been struggling over the last few years, and I think that's because they haven't had that defensive leader at the linebacker position. And getting a guy like him, a guy who is very fast, who got a lot of tackles in college, I think he could step in there right away and fill that need. They have some good pieces on defense. They drafted Vita Vea last year. We saw them get Jason Pierre-Paul in the trade last year. I think that they're starting to get some good pieces together, and I think that getting a leader on linebacker could be where they go right here.
Definitely possible. I have them going a little bit later in the first round. And then let's move on to the Giants. I do have the Giants going quarterback here, but obviously for me, Kyler Murray is taken already. So I have them going Dwayne Haskins and letting him sit at least a year behind Eli Manning, trying to get a grip on that offense and get to learn from a 2-time Super Bowl champion.
Yeah, and Haskins had a very good year last year. the question mark with him is that he only had one good year, and that was a lot of question marks about Mitchell Trubisky as well. And we saw kind of took him a little bit to kind of get going before this past off season. So it'll be interesting to see if maybe having him sit a full season, if the Giants go there, would work out for them. So in my scenario, as I said before, I had the Giants actually trading up in my mock draft. So here I have the 49ers actually picking, and I have them picking a guy that you had mentioned earlier, and that's Montez Sweat. And this is a guy that I think the 49ers can take a little bit of a risk on, because a guy that put up dynamic numbers at the combine with his speed and power. I think that going after him, putting him on the edge with a guy that they draft, so I believe it was Solomon Thomas a couple years ago, put those two together on defense. They have some good pieces, I think, going on offense with Jimmy Garoppolo. Obviously, they signed Tevin Coleman this offseason. Jerick McKinnon's coming back from injury. They have some very good running backs on that team. And just kind of now, it's a little early to go wide receiver here. So I think you need to get some more pressure on the quarterback, and getting Montez Sweat would do that for the 49ers.
It's a good pick. Moving on for the Jaguars now, I have them going Jawaan Taylor, the offensive lineman from Florida. And I have them going this direction because even though this, as we've said, is a defense-heavy draft, their defense actually has a lot of solid pieces, and it was really the offense that was having issues. They obviously addressed the need at quarterback by getting Nick Foles, at least for now addressed it. We'll see how he's able to play. But they need to get him some help in terms of pass blocking for him to make sure he doesn't get sacked a million times a game. And Jawaan Taylor is going to be a good fit in that position for the offensive line for the Jaguars.
Yeah, they definitely need to improve on that offensive line. They took a step back last year, and we saw that with the quarterback, whoever was there, a quarterback for them, whether that be Bortles or Kessler last year, get hit a lot, and they were struggling to find success on the running game. And that's why I am in agreement with you in thinking that Jawaan Taylor is their pick there. Appears to be the best possibly the offensive lineman coming out of the draft. He's a big guy from Florida, and he played in a run-heavy offense at Florida. So I think going to Jacksonville, where they appear to be a run-heavy team, would be a perfect fit for Jawaan Taylor. And he gets to stay in state, too.
Why don't we do it serpentine style? So you can give me the next one, then I'll give you mine for that spot and the next one.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. So with the Detroit Lions, they have the 8th pick. They could go in a lot of different directions here, but I think that they need to get a playmaker for Matthew Stafford on offense. They no longer have Golden Tate. Eric Ebron was let go a couple years ago. So they kind of need a new playmaker. So I think with the 8th pick, the Lions go with Iowa tight end TJ Hawkinson. This guy is a very dynamic playmaker, and I think that is a guy that you can fit into that offense right away and work really well with Matthew Stafford. He's a bigger tight end. He can do a lot of things. He can block, and they're not gonna make a mistake drafting in the first round the tight end this time. They get a good one here with Hawkinson.
Interesting you say that, because I thought I was sneaky putting TJ Hawkinson in this position with the Lions. So I have the same pick as you with Hawkinson, the Iowa tight end, going to Detroit. And then the next pick, I have Buffalo Bills selecting defensive lineman. I have Houston Ed Oliver trying to bolster that defense that took a hit last year after actually being pretty solid a couple of years ago.
Yeah, Ed Oliver, you look at before last year, a lot of people thought that he was going to be the number 1 pick. A lot of people had him going as the 1 pick to whoever would have been the top team at the time. But you look at had a little bit of a down year, was a little bit injured, had a couple on-the-field issues with his coaches that kind of led to him slipping a little bit, but still definitely a top 10 prospect for sure. I have Buffalo going in a different direction, however. I think they go defensive tackle, but I think they go with Quinnen Williams out of Alabama in this scenario. Quinnen Williams is a very explosive player, and we got to see him against very tough competition in the SEC. Ed Oliver, I'm not sure we can necessarily make that case because of the conference he played in. No disrespect to him, but until we see him play in some big-time games, we did see him play some good opponents, but I give the edge here, Quinnen Williams, just because of the fact that he played in one of the toughest conferences in America, and he played on the national spotlight in the national championship game over the last few years.
Yeah, that's true.
And then,
Oh, go ahead.
that would bring us to the 10th pick, and that'd be the Denver Broncos. Denver Broncos kind of in a weird scenario right now. Seems like they want to rebuild, but yet they trade and get Joe Flacco at quarterback. So you're kind of not sure what they want to do here, but they need to get a guy that made a statement. And when I mean statement, mean they put up ginormous numbers at the combine, and they need an offensive playmaker to go with Joe Flacco. So I think here at number 10, they pick DK Metcalf, the wide receiver from Ole Miss. This guy was a highlight reel at the combine. He is a huge wide receiver. And I think that they can, even though he's had a little bit of an injury issue, the trend has been that a wide receiver is going in the top 10. So I think that DK Metcalf is going to be that guy this year going to Denver.
That definitely makes sense, especially since they did get rid of Demaryius Thomas. They still have Emmanuel Sanders there, who's been pretty productive. They have Sutton, too, who it seems like an up-and-comer. So I'm not sure they spend that high pick on a receiver. I have them actually trying to bolster their defense up a little bit more because when they did win the Super Bowl, let's not forget, it wasn't even Peyton Manning that was putting up big numbers. It was their defense absolutely shutting teams down. And I have them going Devin Bush here, the Michigan linebacker.
Yeah, and Devin Bush was a guy from Michigan. I followed Michigan a lot, so I saw him play a lot when he was there. And this guy was the leader of that team on defense. He got a lot of tackles. He's a little bit smaller for a typical linebacker, but this guy got a lot of tackles and was able to put a lick on players. So definitely could be a good pick for Denver if they choose to go in that direction. Who do you have then going with the Bengals at number 11?
Sure. So with the Bengals, there's been some speculation also that they could go quarterback because they might be a little disillusioned with Andy Dalton, giving him so many years to try to succeed there and still not getting the playoff victory. But I have them going defense also, trying to build up their linebacking core with a guy that you had going earlier in the draft, Devin White, the LSU linebacker.
Yeah, and I think linebacker, I think we're in agreement here that linebacker is a position that they have to look at. We've kind of seen what's happened the last couple of years. Montez Burfict, spending linebacker for that team, has had some issues no longer with the team. They need someone to fill that void on defense. So I'm in agreement with you saying that's going to be a linebacker, and that's going to be a Devin. But I think it's Devin Bush from Michigan. As I said, this guy was a leader on that Michigan team for being a smaller linebacker. And I think that he could fit well into that Bengals defense that is going to be looking to improve after struggling drastically last year. And with that, that brings us to the Green Bay Packers. And this is their first of 2 picks in the first round. And I think that the issue that's been happening with Green Bay these last few years has been the defense, and I think an issue has been trying to put pressure on the quarterback. And I think here you get a guy that a lot of people compare to the defensive player in the league. The defensive player in the league these past few years, and that's been Aaron Donald. So with the 12th pick, I have them going Ed Oliver from Houston. As I had mentioned before, it's kind of an interesting scenario just because he didn't play in the best conference, but he has put up some good numbers against the higher opponents in college football. And this guy was double teamed a lot and was still able to do some stuff. So I think that the Packers getting him shows that they are willing to invest in getting someone to put pressure on the quarterback.
That's definitely interesting. I actually have the Packers trading this pick because if you look at their draft position, they're right in front of the Dolphins. And the Dolphins recently got rid of Ryan Tannehill. They brought in Ryan Fitzpatrick, but that's really not a long-term solution in any way for that team. And people have speculated that they're basically waiting to tank this year and then take a quarterback early in next year's draft. But I see a team wanting to jump ahead of them just in case to make sure they get their guy, and that team is the Washington Redskins. So I have the Packers trading this pick to the Redskins, and the Redskins taking the quarterback from Missouri, Drew Lock, with this pick and trying to develop him as their future franchise quarterback.
Yeah, and that's definitely a trade that I could definitely see happening as well. Washington in an interesting scenario with Alex Smith having the devastating leg injury last year. Colt McCoy also suffering a leg injury. They did trade for Case Keenum, but he also had a down year this past season. So trading up to make sure they get a quarterback ahead of a team that is also looking to possibly draft a quarterback would be a good option to go with here. So definitely possibly see that happen. So then at 13, the Miami Dolphins. Who do you think they would go with then in your
So I
case?
have the Dolphins not going quarterback here, especially if Drew Lock does get taken. I don't. They could go Daniel Jones from Duke, but I don't know that they're going to be high enough on him to take him this early. I think that they're going to go offensive line and try to help whoever's back there, quarterback, most likely Ryan Fitzpatrick, and build that offensive line for whoever their quarterback of the future is that they'll get next year. And I have that as Andre Dillard, the offensive lineman from Washington.
Yeah, and Andre Dillard was a guy that definitely did play well in the Pac-12 with the Washington State Cougars. I have them going in a different direction here. Now, obviously, it seems like the Dolphins are going to be rebuilding this year. And I think something that's kind of been a staple for them over the past few years that kind of doesn't get mentioned as much has been their defense. And the defense, they have some good players in the secondary, but I think they need to rebolster that front a little bit. So I think here you go with one of the most, I think, athletic defensive linemen that I've ever seen. And if you don't know what I mean, you should watch the championship celebration from the 2017 national championship game where Clemson won. And if you know where I'm going here, that means I'm going with defensive tackle Christian Wilkins from Clemson. This guy was a huge force that could do a lot of things for that team. Even had some plays on offense during his last year there. So I think they need to get a dynamic playmaker, and this time it would be defense. And besides, if you don't go quarterback this year, like I said, next year's draft has a lot of good quarterbacks as well. Even you could make an argument better than this year's draft. So waiting until next year to pick a quarterback would be just okay if you're Dolphins
And
fans.
Christian Wilkins was really the heart and soul of that Clemson defense too. And he is a very intelligent guy. He's a very hardworking guy. Whoever does pick Christian Wilkins, I think is going to be very pleased to have him in the locker room.
Yeah, and that would bring us then to our 14th pick, and that's the Atlanta Falcons. Now, the Atlanta Falcons had a little bit of a down year this year. They had some injuries. Devontae Freeman missed some time, and the defense kind of took a step back. And I think that there's some multiple different ways you could look at this here, but I think that they need to rebolster that offensive line up a little bit to make sure that Matt Ryan has enough time to pass the ball. So I think they go with Alabama offensive lineman Jonah Williams here. This is a guy you could either put in at your guard or tackle position. So whatever really fills their need the most, they could put him in there. Played on a dynamic offense in Alabama. I think he could fit in well and possibly be starting for them once the regular season comes around.
Yeah, that's a good pick too. So for the Falcons, I have Christian Wilkins, who you mentioned with the pick before. I think that when the Falcons made it to the Super Bowl and honestly should have beaten the Patriots, it was really their defense that forced pressure on the quarterback and forced the turnovers. Their offense was good, as you would expect, but their defense really rose to the occasion that year, and I think they're going to try and get back to that and take an inside presence in Christian Wilkins. Plus, he gets to stay somewhat close to Clemson in that draft pick. And then after that, with the Redskins pick, I had them trading it to the Packers, and I have the Packers actually taking Jonah Williams from Alabama here. And the reason for this is because they just paid a ton of money to Aaron Rodgers. They need to make sure that he is not sacked and pressured nearly as much as he was last year, which was a huge problem. I hope that they finally realize that they need to address that offensive line. They need to fill it with people in case that there's more injuries too. They need to get enough players that they can have Aaron Rodgers be staying upright throughout the whole season.
Yeah, and offensive line would definitely be a good option for the Green Bay Packers. They've had some injury issues there these past few years. Brian Bulaga seems like is getting closer and closer to possibly calling it quits. So I could see him maybe going one more year. So getting a guy to possibly be his replacement could be a good option with the Packers if they do end up going in that direction. I have the Washington Redskins keeping their pick here, and I actually am in agreement with who you think they end up selecting. That's Drew Lock out of Missouri. Now, this is a scenario where Drew Lock doesn't necessarily have to be that guy for them right away. And we saw he put up huge numbers on the team in Missouri, but the reason why he wasn't talked about as much is because Missouri didn't really have that good of a team when he was there throughout his career. His best year was his final year there, where they actually did finish ranked. But I think this is a guy that you don't, like I said, you don't necessarily have to make him your number one right away. But if things don't look good with Colt McCoy or whoever else could possibly be on that team at quarterback, then Drew Lock is a guy who can zip the ball and he can throw the deep ball on target. So you look at that team, you have a fast tight end in Jordan Reed, you have a speedy wide receiver in Paul Richardson. With a guy like Drew Lock there to throw that deep ball, get it to one of those guys, we can see some exciting action from Drew Lock this year. And I think Washington would definitely be rewarded with drafting him. And then that would bring us to pick number 16, the Carolina Panthers. And we saw this past year, they got off to a great start, but then after starting 6-2, they struggled the rest of the way. Christian McCaffrey was dominant for them this year. Cam Newton missed some time due to a shoulder injury. And we did see that Julius Peppers did announce that he was retiring. So I think in this scenario, they go defense. They look for a guy who could possibly fill the void of Julius Peppers. So I think they go with Clemson defensive end. I believe it's pronounced Clelin Ferrell. So this guy, the Clemson defensive line was just a dominant force throughout college football. And this was one of the guys that put pressure on the quarterback. So I think Ferrell could be a guy you fill in right away, fill that hole on defense, and Carolina is going to get a good player that's going to possibly bring up some reminiscence of Julius Peppers.
That's very interesting that you say that because I have the exact same pick for the Panthers. I have no idea how to pronounce his first name either. I have read it as Clelin Ferrell, but it's anybody's guess at this point. But I have them trying to get that defensive line to its former glory, like you said, when Julius Peppers was in his prime. And then with the next pick, I have the Giants taking Cody Ford, the offensive lineman from Oklahoma, trying to make sure that their quarterback is not under constant duress this season.
Yeah, and the offensive line was definitely an issue for them last year as well. Eric Flowers, a guy who they had drafted, was struggling. Nate Solder, a guy who they signed from the Patriots, didn't have that good of a year as well. So offense line is definitely something they need to look at. However, I think a position they need to look at possibly even more is now on the defensive side of the football. So in my scenario, I have them going offense with their first pick, obviously trading up to get Kyler Murray. I think here you have to look at defense, and I'm looking at the players available right now, and I think you have to go with one of the best corners available, and that's DeAndre Baker from Georgia. This guy was a lockdown corner for that Georgia Bulldogs defense, a team that nearly won a national championship a couple years ago and nearly beat Alabama in the SEC championship last year. This is one of the teams that had the opportunity to beat Clemson, not Clemson, but Alabama, not once but twice. And this guy was a factor in both of those decisions. He's a shutdown corner, and the secondary was kind of an issue for the Giants, and they no longer have Landon Collins on defense either. So they need to at least have someone fill in one of the positions. I think cornerback's the spot they go with here. And then that would bring us to pick number 18, and that's the Minnesota Vikings. So our friend Neil Johnson's definitely going to be interested to see where we go on this one. But something I think they need to look at is that offensive line. We saw last year Kirk Cousins was pressured a lot, and the running game didn't seem to find its groove. It was kind of inconsistent throughout the year. So I think that they go with Washington State tackle Andre Dillard here to put on the end of that offensive line, be able to run the ball a lot more. This guy was a very impactful player for the Cougars in the Pac-12. So getting someone to protect your quarterback is huge, especially when you signed a guy like Kirk Cousins to a huge deal. So you have to make sure you protect him, so you go Dillard here.
That's probably the only pick that they would go on offense here because they're pretty set with wide receivers now. They think they're set with quarterback. You would think that they would feel set with running backs as well. I have them going defense here and actually taking a cornerback in Greedy Williams from LSU. I think Trey Waynes has still not really lived up to the expectation that they had for him coming out of college. I think they're going to try to get a little bit more depth in that cornerback position, go with Greedy Williams, who's a ball hawking cornerback. Then for the Titans, with the next pick, I have them going edge rusher and going Brian Burns from Florida State to try to make that defense a little bit more of a factor. They could go a number of directions here because they have some holes to fill on both sides of the ball, but I think that they're going to go defensive line.
Yeah, I'll start with the Vikings pick. I do like the Vikings going with possibly a corner there. Greedy Williams was a dominant corner in the SEC for LSU, so I do definitely think that's a possible pick, and I would like Brian Burns for Tennessee would be a good pick as well. Getting a guy that can put pressure on the quarterback, and typically Florida State defense line. So whoever the first Florida State defensive pick in the draft usually is a very good pick. And we saw that last year with Derwin James. I have them going offense here. And I think that's because Marcus Mariota needs to find some weapons because if he doesn't get any more weapons on that team, they might start to look at possibly getting a new quarterback because of some inconsistent play from Mariota. So they could go a couple of different directions here. They could go tight end or they could go wide receiver. And I think they go with wide receiver here, and they actually go with a guy who's related to Antonio Brown, a Marquise Hollywood Brown from Oklahoma. This guy was a huge playmaker in that offense with Kyler Murray, put up some solid numbers, and was a go-to deep down the field guy. So I think that they go offense here, and they go with that guy from Oklahoma. With the 20th pick, I actually think that the Steelers go with Brian Burns from Florida State. They've been trying to find a guy to fill that linebacker void since the tragic injury to Ryan Shazier, and I think going with a guy with Brian Burns here would be something that could fill that void and kind of help that team go forward, fill that linebacker position need that they've kind of been looking to fill over the last couple of years.
Interesting for sure. I have them actually going a different direction, trying to give a little bit more help to Ben Roethlisberger on that offense. And I have them going with another Iowa tight end, which would be interesting, and actually going with Noah Fant for the Steelers. Then moving on to the Seahawks, I have them going with a guy you had way early in the draft in Rashawn Gary, the defensive lineman from Michigan. So that's probably the biggest difference between our draft choices so far is that I have him going so much later than you do.
Yeah, and if Rashawn Gary slips that low and goes to 21 to Seattle, that would be, I would say, the steal of the draft, just because you can make an argument that he's a top 10 talent. So if he were to drop that low, it definitely would be surprising, at least in my thought, but definitely would be a good pick for Seattle, getting someone to put pressure on the quarterback. Noah Fant's an interesting one because I could see the direction you're going with here too, because Jesse James no longer is on the team. Vance McDonald had some good highlights, but you wouldn't really say was a number one tight end for that team. So Noah Fant could be an option here, and I think it could be an option that no one's really talking about. So I actually do like that pick for you.
Yeah, I think it would be surprising. I don't think anybody's really expecting it, but I could definitely see it happening.
And then going with my pick for Seattle, I actually have them going in-state, picking Washington cornerback Byron Murphy here. That Washington defense was a huge focal point for that team last year as the offense kind of took a little bit of a step back, but Murphy was definitely one of the top corners in that conference and definitely showed throughout the year, especially when they did play some big-time games early on, like against Auburn. So I think they go in that direction. And then with Baltimore, they have a couple of places to fill after a lot of people left during free agency, but I think they need to find someone to kind of catch the ball for Lamar Jackson here. So I think that they go with the other wide receiver from Ole Miss, A.J. Brown, who a lot of people think could be the best overall wide receiver in the draft just because of what he was able to do at the college level. This guy can test well as well, and I think could fit very well in that offense. You have a young quarterback, and now you get a young wide receiver to go with that team. Could be a solid duo for that team for a long time.
I definitely agree with your pick of wide receiver here for the Ravens. And I'm going with DK Metcalf because I don't have him taken yet in my draft. And I think we have a consensus here that he's the best receiver. The only difference in our draft board so far is that I didn't have any other team wanting to go receiver in the first round. But I do have him going to the Ravens, which I think would be a great pick for Baltimore. They've been looking for more help at the receiver position for years now, seemingly ever since they had Torrey Smith and Anquan Bolden on the same team. Then moving on to the Texans, I have them going with offensive line, of course, because let's face it, they got whoever played quarterback for them most of the year killed last season. There was questions whether Bill O'Brien could last given the pressure that was being put on his young quarterback. So I have them going with offensive line and going Dalton Risner from Kansas State.
Okay. And I do think that going offensive line would be a good option here. I have them going with a different player ever. I have them going with guard from Boston College, Chris Lidstrom here. I think a guy that could definitely help protect that offensive line because they need someone to protect Deshaun Watson. He took way too many hits last year. So I agree with you in the scenario of going offensive line, just a different player. And then with the next pick, the second pick of the first round for the Oakland Raiders at number 24, I have them going with a guy you mentioned earlier, Greedy Williams from LSU, the cornerback. They need to kind of start looking at that defensive side of the football, so I think that's why they addressed it with their first two picks. You address the offensive line. Now I think you have to go the secondary, and you pick a guy who played in one of the toughest conferences in the SEC. So go with Greedy Williams here.
That's an interesting pick there. So looking at mine, I have the Raiders here going with Dexter Lawrence of Clemson, the defensive lineman. And this is very Clemson-heavy draft for both of us, I think, having a lot of their players going early on. I know we had Cleveland Williams going earlier. And then for the Eagles, I have Juan Thornbill, the safety from Virginia. So first safety taken in the draft.
Who was that guy you had again, Ryan?
Juan Thornbill.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure I had it right. So I have them looking at the Eagles. I also have them looking at the secondary. I don't think they go safety in this case. I actually have them going corner in this scenario. So I have them going with Temple cornerback Rock Yassim. Definitely the secondary needs something to build for that team. So I think you have to go there. I think that might be one of the weaker positions on that team. So I think you go there and pick him. For Indianapolis, I actually have them going with Dexter Lawrence from Clemson. The Clemson defensive line was dominant, and it's showing here in this draft. 3 going in the first round. You could even make an argument that a couple years ago they could have won in the first round with how good they were. But I think that Lawrence could be a missing piece for that defensive line. Indianapolis could put a lot more pressure on the quarterback now, and they do that with Dexter Lawrence.
Yeah, that's a good pick there, and obviously I would have probably had him going there possibly, if not going earlier on. With the Colts, I actually went a very different direction. I went with the offensive side of the ball to get even more help for Andrew Luck, who obviously had an incredibly resurgent year last season. I have them going with the guy you mentioned already, Marquise Brown, the wide receiver from Oklahoma. I think adding just that one more weapon for him would really put that offense over the top and just give him a plethora of places to throw the football on that team. Then moving on to the Raiders, I have them going running back, trying to once and for all solve that issue where they haven't really been able to get it patched up the way they want it with Marshawn Lynch the past couple of seasons. And I have them going Josh Jacobs, I think the consensus #1 running back from Alabama.
Yeah, Josh Jacobs was definitely would be a solid option here. And Oakland, you can make an argument, is looking for a running back. Marshawn Lynch has been injured the last couple of years. Doug Martin was okay when he filled in, and then some of those other backs they have on the team. I wouldn't necessarily say would be a number one option on that team. With this pick, their third first round pick this year, this was the pick that they got from Dallas. And Dallas, they did a little bit better than I think they thought they would when they got the pick. And because of that, ends up falling all the way down to 27. I think they were hoping it was going to be in the maybe late teens, early 20s, but falling to 27. I think in this case, we're going to see a team that's going to want to trade for that pick. And maybe Oakland gets some more picks in this scenario instead of obviously 3 first-round picks are great, but if you can get a couple more in the second and third round, I think that's what they look to possibly do here. So I have them actually trading this pick to the Super Bowl champion New England Patriots. And with this pick at 27, I have the Patriots actually getting the replacement for Rob Gronkowski. I think they go with the Iowa tight end Noah Fant, who I am a huge fan of. This guy would have been I like that you caught that, right? I'm a big fan of him, and I think that he was the best tight end a couple of years ago if he would have been draft eligible. But going this year falls behind his teammate who kind of stepped up a little bit. But I think that he's a big tight end who can block, and I think he can spread the field a lot, kind of similar to Rob Gronkowski. So I think that they do something that they typically don't do and trade up, and they go after the Iowa tight end. And then looking at number 28, the Los Angeles Chargers, I actually have them looking at offensive line here. I think they go with Cody Ford from Oklahoma to help keep Phillip Rivers protected and to help find Melvin Gordon some more running lanes.
Yep, I have them going offensive line here too, but I have them going Caleb McGarry from Washington. Just trying to fill that need at O-line, trying to make sure Phillip Rivers is able to be successful in what are probably some of his last years in the NFL. And then moving on to the Chiefs, I have this as a very interesting pick. I think they're going to try to replace Eric Berry and fill some gaps in that secondary, which they sorely need to shore up a little bit. And I have them going with a safety from Delaware State, Nasir Adderley, in this position, which could be viewed as a reach for sure because he's a small school guy and you don't always know how they're going to pan out. But that's who I have the Chiefs taking here.
And looking at those picks, I do like that we're both in agreement on the Chargers going offense line. And you want to look, Ryan, we're actually both in agreement on safety as well. However, I actually have them going with Mississippi State safety Jonathan Abram. They have to – obviously, Eric Berry was a huge factor for that team over the past however many years it was. And after letting him go, they have to look for his successor, and I think that they did that with Jonathan Abrams. And then going with 30, the Green Bay Packers' second first-round pick, I think in this case they look at offense. They look to find a possible replacement for Jimmy Graham, who next year his money, I believe, is not fully guaranteed. So they draft Irv Smith Jr. from Alabama. This was a guy who was a speedy playmaker for that team at the tight end position. I think would fit very well in that offense to go along with Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams.
Okay. I have the Packers going defense here again. And their secondary has still been problematic, even though they have some young players starting to fill those roles at the cornerback position. Losing HaHa Clinton-Dix in that secondary leads me to believe they're going to try to fill that hole. And I have them actually going with a safety from Florida, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. And so I have 3 safeties going in the first round, which is very strange in the NFL draft. But that's what I have here. And then with the Rams, I have them going Jeffrey Simmons, defensive lineman out of Mississippi State.
And that's a pick you look at. It's interesting because Simmons actually tore his ACL, I believe. So he would actually miss a lot of the season, if not the full season. So looking at this pick, you're kind of hoping that when he comes back, he would be able to fill that void. And I think that's why he has fallen back in the draft. And this is also assuming you don't give it. This is also kind of the replacement for Ndamukong Suh. I have them going offensive line here because I think they need to fill in a couple of those spots on that line. I have them going with Garrett Bradbury, the center from NC State, who could play center or offensive guard for that team. however they want to play him. And then with the last pick of the first round, the New England Patriots. It's an interesting scenario. So Tom Brady obviously is the quarterback. Brian Hoyer is in a contract year. And a guy who has fallen, and not just my mock draft, but a lot of other mock drafts, is Dwayne Haskins. So I have them going with the Ohio State Buckeyes quarterback here. This is a win-win scenario because Dwayne Haskins doesn't get put into the threshold of starting right away. He's going to get some time to learn under one of the best quarterbacks of all time. And remember, he only basically started one season at Ohio State. So you put him on the bench for a year or two, depending on however long Tom Brady plays, and he learns, develops. I think this is a guy that Bill Belichick, Robert Kraft, they're going to want to keep, and he'll be the successor for Tom Brady.
See, I actually had that same thought, and in my mock draft, really the next guy at quarterback would be Daniel Jones, and I just wasn't sure how crazy the Patriots would be about Daniel Jones, but I thought about maybe them taking a quarterback. I went with wide receiver at this position for the Patriots, and I went with Deebo Samuel from South Carolina. The Patriots are kind of shifty when it comes to wide receivers. You don't really know who they're targeting, and it's usually somebody that you haven't necessarily heard of as much as some of the other players. So I have them going receiver late in the first round. Also, wouldn't be surprised if they traded out of this pick and just moved back farther in the draft, as their team, for the most part, is fairly complete. Obviously, they won the Super Bowl last year, so I have them just adding a little bit more for Tom Brady. I kind of went with this direction because we've seen how Robert Kraft is so fervent to Tom Brady. I don't know that he would take his replacement or a potential replacement for him in the first round at this juncture.
Yeah, I can make an agreement with you on that. However, we did kind of think about that with Jimmy Garoppolo. We didn't think they were going to go really high with a quarterback in regards to that case when they did go with Jimmy Garoppolo. But Deebo Samuel was a guy who I really liked in college at South Carolina, a guy who was able to do a lot of things for that team. He was able to catch the ball. He was able to run that ball in wide receiver motions and those scenarios. So I think that would actually be a good fit for them if they were to go in that direction. He could be a lot of things for that team. Doesn't necessarily have to be a wide receiver. Could be a kicker or a punt returner for that team. So I definitely do think that could be a good direction with them. And Ryan, with that said, that concludes our mock drafts. Looking at this year, we only had 4 picks that were the same. Does that surprise you after last year's, or do you think that we both kind of had similar scenarios but just went different directions with the players?
Well, we had a couple things that kind of led to the differences. So it obviously started with Kyler Murray going the first overall pick for me, and Nick Bosa going first overall for you. So we didn't have a consensus number 1 pick this year. We did have some, or at least several, I would say, where we had the same position being taken, just a different player because of how it kind of shook out. So I'm not necessarily surprised. And a lot of the draft picks will probably be sort of out of left field. We know there'll be some reaches. We know there'll be some players falling that we don't expect. So that's what's kind of fun about the NFL draft, is that if any of us were able to actually predict exactly what would happen, that would be pretty impressive.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it was actually very unique to see how different our picks were this year. And I'm really excited to see how this turns out when the draft comes next week, and how if any of us get some of these right, many of these right, who knows what happens. Because I remember last year, a lot of us really weren't expecting 5 quarterbacks to go in the first round. But like I said, we're a week away from the draft. Is one of the most exciting things about the NFL, especially during the offseason. So with that said, the mock draft is done for us. But like I said, we'll still have a lot of NFL draft talk, especially on next week's show before the NFL draft does come out. But with that said, that does bring us towards the end of our show, which means we're talking about fantasy football. And with that said, our topic this week is focusing on some players from the playoffs. So we're looking at a scenario where you could either go either direction. So, Ryan, if you had to pick a guy who struggled in the playoffs this year, but will bounce back with a dominant fantasy season, or a player that dominated in the playoffs that should struggle this season? What player would you have in mind for that scenario?
So are you talking fantasy playoffs or the actual playoffs?
So player from the actual playoffs that will either have success or struggle in fantasy.
Okay, so I'm going to go with a guy who had some success in the playoffs this past season, mostly because the regular starting running back was not able to go at full steam. And this guy is CJ Anderson. So we saw CJ Anderson come on really strong during the playoffs and have some great games for the Rams, really propelling that rushing game to the next level in the absence or limited workload for Todd Gurley. And now I think that his situation this year is much different, and he's not nearly going to get the same looks that he did last year playing with. Which team is he on now? I want to say.
Well, I believe he signed with the Detroit Lions.
I was going to say the Lions. So they have some other good running backs on the Lions. I don't think he's going to be the featured back. And it seems like whichever running back goes to the Lions does not have a solid season. So I think he was sort of a flash in the pan last year after a lot of other teams have sort of given up on him. So I don't expect him to have as great of a season as he had in those last couple of playoff games.
Yeah, looking at my case, a guy who I saw step up, not just later on in the season, but a little bit in the playoffs, who I'm not necessarily sure is going to be a number one feature back in this league. I think it could be Tariq Cohen. The reason why I say that is because we know this guy is a great pass receiving back. He's great returning the ball and kicks and punts. But how is he going to be able to handle the load as a number one running back? Remember, this team traded away Jordan Howard to the Philadelphia Eagles. So this is in Tariq Cohen's hands now. And he's been a very solid fantasy player since coming into the league a couple years ago. But I'm not so sure I'm sold on him yet as a number one running back in this league. I do think he's a good fantasy running back, but I think that he's going to struggle a little bit this year, kind of adjusting to that number one running back position for the Bears.
That's definitely possible because he seemed to fit a very specific niche in that offense, kind of the way that Darren Sproles used to when he was way back in the day with the Saints, and then now with the Eagles. He was sort of like the third down out of the backfield, James White sort of style. And I'm not sure how he's going to do getting the ball on more plays than he did last season, because he's not going to be necessarily that one play game breaker now. He's going to be an every down guy, and I don't know if he's going to be able to handle that effectively.
Yeah, and
it'll be interesting to see, because I don't want to see the Bears succeed.
Yeah, and like I said, he's a smaller back too, so it'll be interesting to see if he can take all the tough hits that will come his way, being a full-time back, getting a lot more touches. But with that said, Ryan, that does bring us to the end of this week's episode. What final thoughts do you have to say before we go?
Thank you, everyone, for listening and continuing to support us. You can find us on Google Play, iTunes, and Speaker, or listen to the live version of it on YouTube. We usually record Tuesday nights or Monday nights or occasionally Wednesday nights, but it's always some sort of night. Like we say every single week, continue to engage with the social media posts and follow us on Twitter and like the page Brew Sports and Touchdown Tuesday on Facebook.
Yeah, Ryan, you said it basically right there. Also, make sure to keep updated with our Buddies Basketball podcast, Run It Back. They've had some technical issues that they are starting to work through with the playoffs coming around. So podcast with them should continue to be coming out shortly. As Ryan had said, follow or make sure to listen to us on iTunes, Google Play, and Spreaker each week, or on YouTube when we do live on the show. Also, check out Facebook and Twitter each week. Search the handle TDWN2's podcast if you're looking on Twitter. Next week should be an exciting episode as well, as we break down the final thoughts of the NFL draft. We're looking to have a couple of correspondents on the show next week as well. So hopefully we can get them on for you so they can give their thoughts on the draft. Again, thank you for listening this week, and we look forward to discussing more NFL draft talk with you next week. Have a good night, everyone.